Keir Starmer says that the vast majority of the Labour Party supports his leadership. Pressure continues to mount, though, over his decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to Washington. Vetting officials recommended that he be denied security clearance. However, Starmer still maintains that he believes that Labour can still win in the next general election under his leadership. Here to weigh in on this more, joining from London, is British journalist and an international affairs commentator, Tom Gross. Hi, Tom. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Emily.
So I guess let's start with why the Mandelson-Epstein link is such a problem for Starmer.
Well, Starmer was already quite unpopular because people aren't quite clear what he stands for. He's made a lot of U-turns. He's not very charismatic, and he was already quite unpopular. But the Mandelson affair is particularly toxic because it involves Jeffrey Epstein. It involves possibly taking money from Epstein. It involves possibly selling British state secrets, which is illegal when Mandelson was previously in government. And before Starmer appointed Mandelson to be the ambassador to the US in 2024, Starmer was warned that Mandelson was, a controversial and dangerous appointment. Mandelson is a senior figure as far back as Tony Blair, 20 odd years ago in Britain, and had to resign then because of controversies then. But I think the Mandelson's thing is just sort of the icing on the cake. A lot of people within the Labour Party have it in for Keir Starmer even before this.
And could the Epstein case still damage British politics all these years later?
Well, it is. Look, it's also damaging the British royal family. Of course, the head of state in Britain is the King, King Charles, and his brother has been stripped of his title, no longer Prince, Andrew, formerly known as Prince. And so both parts of British government, the monarchy, the head of state, and the executive branch, the Prime Minister, may have to resign. But I think it's something more concerning, I think, than this. If Keir Starmer has to go, and it looks like he may well have to go after local elections in about 10 days from now, when Labour are forecast to do very, very badly, that would mean Britain will have its 7th Prime Minister in a decade since 2016. If you go back to 1964, that's when you see the previous 7 prime ministers for over half a century. So you've got 7 prime ministers over half a century, and then 7 prime ministers in only a decade. And really, it's a sign of instability in a country, Britain, that's meant to be one of the more stable democracies.
And if there's a change in leadership in the UK, what will it mean for Britain's relationship with Israel? Like you said, I mean, there has been quite a lot of turnover in recent years.
Well, the ruling Labour Party, because just to explain, they have a big majority, so the new leader would come from within the Labour Party. The ruling Labour Party is very hostile to Israel, not necessarily Starmer, and not necessarily the potential leader, successive candidates, but the grassroots, the MPs, want to drag the party to a much more hostile position. I would give you an example of the new Hungarian Prime Minister, Magyar. He's not particularly pro or anti-Israel, but he immediately made anti-Israel comments to kind of curry favor with popular sentiment in Europe and in Hungary. So a new leader of Labour, I suspect, will be more hostile to Israel. Keir Starmer's wife is Jewish. They bring up their children as Reform Jews. They occasionally attend synagogues on Friday night. Through his wife, he has relatives in Israel. So although Starmer is no supporter of Netanyahu and the Likud, he nevertheless is sensitive to the fact Israel has real security issues. He's sensitive to anti-Semitism being a danger even against his own children. None of his potential successors have any emotional attachment or familial attachment to Israel or Jews, and therefore they probably sacrifice what's already rather a weakened relation with Israel in order to placate the very vociferous anti-Israel sentiment. By the way, one more thing, a bit like the Democrats in America, you have Gavin Newsom in California criticizing AIPAC. I don't think Newsom is necessarily anti-Israel, but he's trying to curry favor with the base of his party by sacrificing Israel. You will likely see something similar in Britain, and things won't be so good.
Well, and with Starmer, like you said, is obviously a connection to his wife, and I know that he also visited the Jewish community after the firebombing not too long ago. But does that pose a dangerous threat, given that others may not have a reason to have any kind of personal connection to the experience of the Jewish community?
No, I think any potential successor will call for the law authorities and the police to clamp down on anti-Semitism and condemn anti-Semitism. None of them are not sympathetic to that. They definitely, but the problem is that at the same time, if they allow really incitement against the state of Israel to such an extent, way beyond anything Israel's actually done or been accused of, that whips up an atmosphere of anti-Semitism, and at least in part, the anti-Semitism in Britain is a result of anti-Zionism, and there's a very strong overlap between the two. So it's like, the BBC yesterday, they had a report about how terrible anti-Semitism was, and the next report implied that Israel had killed 2,600 civilians in Lebanon, without mentioning that those numbers are dubious and a great number of them are Hezbollah, and without mentioning that Hezbollah had been firing rockets into Israel. So you whip up feelings against Jews, or rather, if you're Jewish in Britain and you condemn Israel, condemn Israeli policies outright, then you're an acceptable Jew. If you refuse to condemn Israel, then it's sort of open season on Jews, and it very quickly glides or slides into traditional anti-Semitic hate.
All right. So thank you very much, Tom Gross, for your input.
You're welcome.
All right.